I was kind of hoping by June 20th I could finish talking about mental health and move into positivity and gratitude and altruism and things, but I might need to focus for a while on just being my own therapist and really talking myself through some of these energies. And I wonder if getting in alignment with repaying past karma is sort of the opposite to psychosis. Because psychosis seems to be a reaction or an accumulation of past karma in this life and maybe in previous lives and maybe related to lives of other people and trying to resolve karma external to ourselves. Because fundamentally we're all one, so it makes sense that other people's karma could get into our field, and maybe it's because we have the capacity to resolve that, so it could actually be a compliment in a way. This is just me trying to put positive framing on it, but I feel like in being my own therapist through this, I also need to focus on karma and altruism and things, and hopefully one day merge with that naturally altruistic state without reacting to the past. So karma in a way is reacting to the past, but I feel altruism in the way that I did feel it at one time is just the natural way of being, that generous state of being. And what in a way is preventing this generous state of being is fear. Fear for myself. And can I move through that instead of running away from it? So I don't know what that looks like, and I do want to continue to talk about the other things that I've written down and then read those things and then see what happens. And I feel also that psychosis repeats because whatever is not resolved keeps repeating. And so how can I stop that from repeating or make it so it's the last repetition and not have it translated into something related to mental health? Can I be strong enough to really go through it and face it? So yeah, this next bit, being my own therapist, crafting my performance for that show if I make it. Sometimes when I have something like that to look forward to, I have some kind of crisis leading up to it and it's hard for me to attend. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but we'll see. And so this next part isn't as much about focusing on self-directing my lifestyle design, but really directing my energies towards talking with myself and going into some of these energies that might come up. So it's more of a psychological thing than a physical thing. And yeah, we'll see what happens. So I wanted to continue to self-direct myself away from the mental health system, but now it's not just about getting out of it, but it's actually maybe allowing some of those energies to be translated into something good and repay the karma of that instead of translating into a mental illness and medicating and then not being able to move through those translations because it gets translated into a mental illness. It doesn't get translated into what it really could be translated into, which could be something really meaningful. So can I make meaning out of some of this past stuff? And I remember a couple years ago having a test for histamine, and I tested for high histamine, and I asked my doctor to repeat that test later, and he wouldn't, saying they don't do the test anymore. And histamine also has something to do with the heart. People with high histamine can have heart troubles, but it also can be an indication for some types of mental health issues. And I think it's related to the undermethylation biotype. So I was looking up supplements for high histamine, and one of them is SAM-E. And I was taking SAM-E for quite a while, but I stopped when I came to California. It was actually a supplement that my naturopath recommended for me after I did a DNA test. So I think my genetics show that I have this histamine trouble. So on Monday I might actually ask Hardy Nutritionals if it could be good for me to go back on the SAM-E because of the histamine thing. So we'll see, because if that's something that can help with this anxious feeling, which could actually be just something to do with undermethylation, then that would be good. So also paying attention to the physiology and metabolism, all different levels of one's being. And I wonder if I can create some kind of self-direction center when I get back, even if it's starting off small, because I have a lot of good books and good website links and good printed things that I've printed over the years, and maybe it could be helpful to create mutual support around working through past trauma and maybe translating that into altruism. So I wonder if together we can create altruism out of past trauma. And I feel like map consciousness is trying to do that. It moves us into this place of altruism when we're being in touch with our trauma as a reaction and a saving mechanism in a way. So can we do that? Can we translate it into altruism instead of having it translated into mental illness? And I'm sort of seeing this by just looking back and sort of harvesting my mania. And maybe by translating it into altruism, we can avoid the mental health system. And I can almost see how my brain could almost interpret it ending my life one day as altruism if it thinks that it's just a horrible brain and I'm a horrible person. So can I do things to show my brain that I'm not a horrible person and I don't think I am, and I'm moving towards not being a horrible person until it really sees that, and it's more with that than it is with the trauma memes, which again are just stories we've told us on how to interpret our experiences. It doesn't even have to be interpreted that way per se. It's more having an experience and then after the fact thinking, how would society translate this? And then taking all of that on. And I think it's more that than anything else. And I feel like when we're in the mental health system, it becomes the director of our lives, and we act out its programs of going to see the doctor, taking our pills, acting out things according to being on these meds. They set the scenes and they set the stages. They set the stages of where we might live a lot of the time, or influence that, or set the stages of the doctor's offices and things. And these are different scenes and sets and stages of our lives. So can we create different stages? Can we stage altruism? And I was also thinking of the experience that many of us probably have where we really like something and we're enthusiastic, and then we share it with somebody else and then they say their opinion about it and it's negative. And then that actually changes how we see that thing we were excited about. We feel less excited. And the reason I bring that up is because if we have an experience in altered states and we want to share it in a certain way, or we see it in a certain way or feel it in a certain way, and then somebody comes along and gives their interpretation based on mental health, then that will put a different perspective on it, and we'll see it in a different way, feel it in a different way, not be excited about it, even though there's parts that are really not exciting at all. They're really scary. So I'm just saying that what we put on it as an interpretation later on changes that experience. So even now, looking at the past or looking at my first experience in the altered state, I feel like drawing upon harvesting that right now might be really helpful, because there was a lot in there that was actually designed to protect me from the past. And now I feel like I don't really have that protection because I'm on my own out of the mental health paradigm. And I was also thinking about how on an airplane, if there's a decompression event or whatever they call it, one is instructed to put on their oxygen mask first and then help the other. And I feel like I still need to put on my oxygen mask. I still need to help myself through a lot of these things. And I wonder if one day one can just breathe in beauty and not be breathing in through these memes of past trauma. And I wonder if we can put on our oxytocin mask first. And I used to talk about oxytocin consciousness. And can I move into oxytocin consciousness first before trying to help others? And related to how shame is the lowest level of consciousness, And a lot of us are in very low levels of consciousness when we receive a diagnosis. And receiving a diagnosis adds to the lessening or the lowering of consciousness, and because it's full of shame, even though they try to make it seem like it's not by their words and their campaigns. So I really feel like it's detrimental to put that kind of label on somebody in those low states. But a lot of time it translates all the shame and despair and suffering and sorrow that one is going through human experience into just the shame of mental illness, and all the emotions get translated into symptoms, because whatever was happening before gets translated into behaviors that other people perceive as something's wrong, and then instead of addressing what's wrong, it's seen as a mental illness and then translated into that. And yeah, I've said that kind of stuff a lot, and I see how that mechanism works, and I'm just afraid of being put back into that machinery. But then I also see how it kind of saved me for a while and gave me a reprieve of sorts. Maybe I'd rather translate it all and just say it's just all a mental illness and just leave it at that. And I was in a very shameful state before my crisis in January, so I see how shame is really dangerous. So anything that I can do in those higher levels of consciousness would be protective. And I don't know if talking to myself is enough to do that. Maybe talking to myself is enough to move myself out of the mental health paradigm, but I don't know if it's enough to do that with this other stuff after moving outside of it, because something needs to actually happen, like action, not just sitting around and talking about this mental stuff. And I wonder if playing with meaning instead of playing with thought raises consciousness. So that's related to whether or not this self-dialogue will help. So if I just talk about my thoughts and stuff, it might not be as helpful. That might actually resonate more with these lower levels of consciousness than if I actually make some kind of meaning or translate it into something else. And I think I will work on that more when I'm going to talk more about that stuff after this mental health stuff. And when I was watching that Jason Silva video, I thought of how he talks a lot about hedonic adaptation. And I feel like we have an adaptation to meaning, and that's why we need to make our own. So when we constantly are taking on the meanings of society, we're so adapted to that it becomes meaningless. So making meaning of one's own. And I think I could see that if I start to look at some of my past experiences, even in map consciousness, it's important to perhaps make the meanings out of it that I want. So I could say that experience with that homeless man where he said, build the dream center, I could say that means I'm crazy because I took somebody out for coffee on a whim like that, or it means that I really need to build this dream center, and creating an interesting dialogue around that instead of just brushing it off. Or things that happened in the past. Well, I'm here right now sitting in California and living a dream that I wanted to live. So all those past things led me to this. So everything's meant to happen as it does, and I understand that. So being with that, and also maybe now that I've lived the dream of getting back to California, maybe it's time to consider this dream center thing or other things that could be something to play with. And I feel like if I wanted to create the dream center, I need to go study with Patch Adams. I feel like the meanings change our behavior. And in map consciousness, sometimes we see that all that we've been given by society means nothing, and we don't know how to get out of it. And we're trying to escape that gravity. So we're in this altered state, and all of a sudden that gravity of the whole society and what we've been conditioned with in our life comes back to try to reattach to us, and we're crawling away from it like we're in quicksand, and we get re-trapped by that. But maybe we can actually move through it by making meaning out of it instead of running from it and making up our own meaning. So instead of running from that, I might have to really go into it and translate it into some kind of meaning, instead of just looking at it and the meanings that that tells me from society. What meanings do I really make out of it? Or can I make out of it? And can I create with that? Can I be creative with that? Is that a creative process? Can I build a bridge of meaning for myself, at least subjectively, to bridge the two worlds? There's this other world that I've been in, and it's in the same place, but it's a different orientation within. And then this other orientation of conditioning comes back. And how does one bridge that? And can I build that bridge of meaning instead of building a bridge of meaning that might cause me to jump off a bridge, or being in touch with old memes that might lead me to jump off a bridge? So really building this bridge of meaning could be building a bridge of life, and it might be something I have to always do to stay one step ahead of this old meaning that is like a shadow, always there. So yeah, I feel like consciousness can send messengers, and when I was in that really scary state of consciousness 6 years ago, there were people really trying to help me. It's like consciousness knew I was struggling and was trying to help me through these old energies of consciousness. And people are part of consciousness, so they can actually be recruited to sort of help at times. And they may not even really know that they're doing it. But I wonder if I'm able to make meaning that I don't need to rely on this outside help. And I don't know if I want to rely on the outside help, because all of those things are systems of things that funnel a person into their meanings of things. And I want to get away from this us versus them thing in terms of me versus the mental health system or whatever. It's just a system of memes, so it's just about language, and what is the bridge between us versus them? It's sort of language, and can one build that bridge of language? And it seems like language is the bridge between the self and the moment. And it's not about me and my past and what I've been through, but it's what possibility do I want to live out? And what is actually made possible by my past? And what do I want to embody instead of do? And this invites other elements besides just the doer. And right now with that heart energy I feel like I'm embodying something that wants to be given voice to, that might be able to be moved through to embody something else. And can I have an orientation of values instead of trying to do something valuable? Because doing something valuable is still a projection. And can I let this energy direct me? So there's self-direction, but then there's the direction of this energy, which could change direction each moment. So when we try to set a direction, it prevents this living, fluid energy from directing our perception moment to moment. And when we set up too much direction, we're directing our perception instead of letting the moment direct our perception. And so if I let the energy direct me, something is created through me. And I wanted to create a new word called some energy, because a thing, or when we always say something, we're always thinking in terms of things. But if we say some energy instead of something, then it could be something else. And some energy could also be the sum of the energy moment to moment, and building capacity for that instead of dividing up the moment. It's sort of summing the energies of the moment and summoning the energies of the moment and moving as that. So it's not how do I create, but it's something is created through me, or some energy is created through me, or some flow is created through me. And not just created through me, but one is then that flow and that energy, and not this me separate from the creation. So maybe we become instruments of some creation, the creation we were meant to unfold when we were born. And introducing new words could be how we see a new world. It could be the bridge to the new world, seeing things in terms of energies. So maybe by being in contact with the energies within, that will create something or some energy. And it's a process of energy transformation. And we're not this thing transforming, we're the process of transformation itself. We are catalysts for something. We can catalyze a new world. And it's energy transformation. So instead of creating things, can we transform energy? Can we transform things into energy with the way we speak? Because the things are energy, but can we see them more as energy when we're saying it's energy as opposed to calling everything things? And I feel like mania is seeing what reality is bringing to us and through us. And I wonder if we can create an omnipolar sangha. I don't know what sangha is exactly, but it's sort of like a community. It just sounded cool. And I wonder if one day I'll just be able to laugh at all this. I was able to laugh my way through most of the time after being diagnosed with a mental illness. And can I connect with that again to laugh my way through some of this other stuff? And a cool thing on the internet is if you look up Dion Bimal 90-day challenge, and it's a good thing. You get a video a day and there are things to contemplate and it's free, and I found that really helpful at one point. And that's just to mention some things that come to me that I've utilized in the past that were helpful, that maybe I'll have to get myself reacquainted with again to get through this next bit. And I was thinking about focus and how it's part of seeing, but focus isn't seeing. But what we focus on makes that part of seeing more salient. But can we focus but not focus? Can we put our focus more to the peripheral and include the whole field and allow that orientation perception to bring some of the beauty that's around us to us, instead of just bringing what is made salient by our words? And I remember reading in one of Dr. David Hawkins' books that when one gets to the higher levels of consciousness, the vision actually goes more to the peripheral. And I just thought it was really interesting that he wrote that. And I think there could actually be more altruism in the non-focusing, and that we're not focusing on our goals and desires, but what is coming to us and how we can see that and act. Because desire is delay. It's I want something other than now, and having that goal, and then not seeing what is present now that one can actually act on. So becoming an instrument of action in the moment and seeing what one can do instead of seeing only what one desires. And it's not even just seeing what one can do, it's watching oneself do what one can do. Because when one really sees, one gets in connection with that. And I was thinking in terms of this festival that I'll maybe be performing in, that this dialogue with myself is really an art. This isn't anything else but just an art, and sort of the art of self-dialogue, or being in communion with oneself. I was thinking about the evolution of attention, and that related to human beings, and how we are the species on Earth with perhaps the most developed attention. So what I mean by that is a deer eating grass isn't paying attention to eating grass, it's just eating the grass. Whereas we as human beings can actually have this other element of paying attention to what we're doing. And in this attention, in that space, we make decisions and choices and things like that. Or we just watch ourselves do that. Like maybe eating a bad item of food that's not good for us, and paying attention, or having something else come into attention about how we're interpreting that, in that we shouldn't be eating it or whatever. And I was thinking about how as infants we start off needing attention. We have to have attention. Not just somebody to feed us, but we need the attention of love. And then when we become toddlers and children, we want attention, so we do things to get the attention of other people. So wanting attention and trying to get it. And then maybe when we start studying and learning, we're actually paying attention to things. But it seems that we can also get to this place where we are attention itself. We're attention in our beingness, and we realize that we're not identified with the content that arises in that attention. So there's this other element that can attend to attention, and that seems to be kind of how we develop, but it also could be part of the evolution of consciousness. So can I be aware that I'm attending to something and not just immersed and lost in the content of what it seems like I'm attending to? And if I'm lost in the content of what I'm attending to, I'm not really attending to it. Or I'm attending to it, but I'm not attending to attention. I'm not attending to my attention. And it's our most precious resource. Really, all marketing is trying to get our attention and put their content in our field of attention and awareness. And if we don't give attention to certain things, then we need somebody else to give attention to it. So if I'm not paying attention to how my knee hurts and maybe do something to strengthen it, then eventually I'll need a doctor to pay attention to it, and maybe medications and surgery. So it's important to be aware of the content of attention, but it's also important to realize that we have this space of attention, and can we attend to that, and can we tend to that space and tend it like we might tend a garden that we really care about. So can we pay attention to attending and not to what the attention is holding, the content? And I was thinking that the word materialist rhymes with etherealist, and I just thought that was interesting in terms of going from being a materialist to an etherealist. And self-languaging is important. The language we use partially creates direction by unfolding meaning and possibilities. So language is actually part of direction itself. So we think of goals, and goals are direction. And any language is a direction. It occupies space and time. It's a movement projected out into inner space and time, and it creates this direction inwardly. So by creating all this context of words, I've created sort of this map, this direction, this context in space and time, and my languaging can be directed within that map, but also directing the language one uses or is used within oneself in that space that we can attend to. It's creative, and that's an important part. Even in talking about the past, it's language directing the content of my awareness and attention into the past. And I wonder how much that is necessary. And some of my notes are out of order. I probably already said I can't wait for self-directed funding to do self-direct myself. And it's important to design my life moving forward and also keep this design of self-dialogue, because self-dialogue seems to be a certain type of self-direction, and continuing to point myself in a different direction than pathology. And I made a note to myself about being a self-dialogue coach and relanguaging towards self-direction, and not self-direction necessarily in goals, but just being the director of one's internal context and how that helps to unfold one's life. So I might end up sitting on my butt for 2 years and talking to myself, but it might have really big implications for the way the rest of it unfolds. If we don't read language, we'll be limited by the stories we've been told. And I think that's what's happening with some of this past stuff that I want to look at, is there's stories I've been told and tell myself, and and views of society. But if I can relanguage it and recontextualize it, make meaning out of it, then it won't be limiting in the same way. And it could be acting as a limiter of the consciousness and the energy that's able to flow through me. So it could be important to make it so my body can contain more energy, but also some of these old energies that are holding me could be a good thing in a way, because I don't want to get too high, or too high before it's time. So if I recontextualize that, I might be able to walk through it a lot more smoothly. And I don't know. I will see. And many of us can't wait for this model of self-directed funding. They were saying it was first introduced or shown evidence towards in 2003. It's already 2017. So it takes a long time for these things to come about. And I ordered a DVD called The Virtues of Non-Compliance on the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community website. So that should be interesting, because now I'm actually in that space of non-compliance. And I remember hearing a talk by somebody at one of my peer support days or something like that, and they were talking about how one of the number one factors in whether someone gets better or not is actually if they can direct their self. Paternalism and any form of coercion is actually very, very detrimental. It's detrimental to the relationship. If somebody's trying to support me and I feel they're being coercive, well, I don't want their support, or I'm feeling like, yeah, I don't want their support. It's actually worse than having no support. And no wonder a lot of homeless people just don't want the support, because it's so coercive. And I came across an article in a Scientology magazine, of all things, that was just sitting there, and I didn't even know it was Scientology, and I don't know anything about Scientology, but maybe one of the reasons why they're so demonized is because they're very against psychopharmaceuticals, and they have programs to help people move through things without relying on that. And so they were talking about how the pharmaceutical companies are really medicalizing addiction, calling it addiction disorder and things, and putting it in the DSM. So then that way, best practice and best treatment is to put someone on drugs, put someone on psychopharmaceuticals instead of being on the street drugs. And a lot of times the psychopharmaceuticals are just derivatives of the street drugs that can be patented and sold at high prices and handed out by doctors getting paid a lot of money. So it's just having a different drug dealer, really. And I don't think that's really what people want. They want some kind of root, getting to the root of things, really. And so it was a really good article, actually, and it was kind of really scary, too, of what is being done. It's called medication-assisted treatment or something, in regards to getting people from being addicted to certain drugs and then onto the pharmaceuticals. Just changing the addiction to one that's more socially acceptable and actually very well funded. So that was sad, and I could extrapolate that article a bit, but I probably shouldn't right now. And I wonder if there's a way for people to be prevented from needing some of these services in the first place. And to me, I still need some form of self-directed service or funding, but maybe I can talk myself through not even needing that kind of thing. And by talking about some of the past, maybe that will help to unfold some of the things that led up to this, which all of that, instead of being listened to, is just, well, it's a mental illness and we don't have time to listen to you, take this pill. And now that I'm not taking that pill, I might have to spend a lot of time listening to myself. Because that's the thing, where I made mistakes is when I didn't really listen to myself. So in 20 years is not acceptable. We need this now. And how can we support each other? And I was thinking about how I've read that the brain doesn't know the difference between if I scratch my head or if I actually watch someone scratching their head, or maybe even if I think about scratching my head. So the brain doesn't actually know the difference. So to me, I can relate this to how self-dialogue could actually be just nearly as good as talking to a therapist or a good friend, because the brain doesn't really know the difference about who I'm talking to. I'm just talking, and it does know I'm not talking to a friend, but maybe I am. Maybe I can be my own best friend and my own therapist, and a lot of things for myself that isn't really out there, or people just don't have the time, or if they do, it costs a lot of money. So time and money, the things in the world that people seem to value the most. And I'm spending my time talking to myself. So maybe in this way I'm valuing myself. And these are all very basic, fundamental things when it comes to support. So yeah, I'm just saying that talking to myself could be just as good, because so many of us want people to talk to, but we never think we can just talk to ourselves. And doing it in this witnessing way on video could actually help the brain, because I'm saying it and then I'm seeing it. And in terms of learning, people learn the most by actually teaching, and there's people that learn by seeing or reading or doing or hearing, like having things explained. And I think that this self-dialogue touches all those dimensions of learning.